Now, another thing you might want to do is exchange information with Excel. Either save MATLAB data as an Excel file so you can read it into Excel, or open up an Excel file in MATLAB. So if you look in the PowerPoint, it uses an older way of doing that, which is XLS read, XLS write. But MATLAB, the MathWorks discourages using that. However, if you have an old version of MATLAB, these newer functions, write matrix and read matrix, may not work. So you may have to use XLS read and XLS write. Okay? But don't use it unless you have to. If you have an up-to-date version of MATLAB, use write matrix. And here's how it works. Right, so you have a matrix, again, the same one I was dealing with before, M3. I'm going to write matrix M3 to a file called matrix3.xls. Okay, and again, it's just really irritating, but the syntax is a little different. Here, the variable name does not go in quotes, whereas with save, it did. Okay, just different software engineers implementing these different commands, and they chose different syntax. All right, so always just refer back to the examples if you need to get the syntax straight. All right, so this will create a file matrix3.xls, which is an Excel format. So I can open it in Excel. All right, and there it is. All right, it's just a bunch of numbers. The numbers from that matrix is stored in Excel format. Now let's write something else. We can also write text. Because an Excel file can have numbers or it can have text. So let's say we have a string array with these names, and we want to write that to the Excel file, but let's put it on a separate sheet. So you can specify what sheet to write it to, like so. You put sheet in quotes, and then whatever you want that sheet to be called, it's going to be called names. Right, so this is actually going to add a second worksheet to the Excel file and write these names to it. Okay, so there's a second worksheet called names that has those names in it. All right, so with write matrix, you can write numerical matrix, or you can write a string array. And I know it says matrix, but this is really not a matrix, but it doesn't matter. In MATLAB, everything ultimately is a matrix. Even a scalar is a matrix. It's a 1-by-1 matrix. And so even if it's a vector, MATLAB still fundamentally considers it to be a matrix. And you can also read a spreadsheet file with, of course, read matrix. Okay, so I'm going to read back in that matrix that I just wrote to the Excel file. So I'm going to clear the workspace again, read the matrix from that Excel file. And once again, I can choose my own name. I'm going to call it MAT3 this time. All right, and there you go. So it read that same matrix back in, stored it in an array called MAT3. Now notice I didn't specify the sheet this time, so it defaults to the first sheet. And you can, by the way, you can specify the sheet either by name or by number. Okay, so now I'm going to read the string information, the text information from that second worksheet. And for that, I have to use something called read cell. And that doesn't mean anything to you yet because we haven't covered cell arrays. But that's something we'll cover in a couple of weeks. Okay, so, but just for right now, just remember this name. It's called read cell. File name. Which sheet do you want? I want the second sheet. So I can either put the name, I can put names, or I can just put 2, give me the second sheet. Okay, and that puts it in something called a cell array, which we'll learn about in a couple of weeks. But you can just immediately convert it to a string array like so. Okay, now it's a string array, something you're already familiar with. And again, if you have an old version of MATLAB, you have to do it with XLS read. You do it like so. XLS read, and I actually kind of like XLS read because it automatically separates numerical and text information. But don't use it unless you have to. Okay? If you have a later version of MATLAB, use read matrix or read cell. All right, any questions about that? All right, so just to recap, we've seen basically 3 different ways that you can export information from MATLAB. You can just save the workspace and then load it back in a binary format that's only readable by MATLAB. Or you can save it in ASCII format, save an array in ASCII format, and then load it back in as well. And the answer to the question in the chat is, I have no idea why they changed. Because I kind of, well, actually, maybe I do. Because we sometimes found people would have trouble using XLS read and write, especially on Macs. Because it's just has to connect to the Excel license probably. And sometimes I had trouble doing that. All right, so with read matrix, write matrix, you don't have these problems with trying to deal with Excel. All right. Or the third way, you can write it as an Excel file with write matrix, read it back in with read matrix. Or if it's text information, read cell.